I want to start off by taking a leaf from what's happened to us in the popular media. In these prissy times, newspapers, radio, and TV, you'll notice, routinely warn adult audiences that the content may be objectionable. I'm an adult, you're telling me it's going to be objectionable? Okay. So anyways, given the nature of the topic, I thought I should warn you that the listener discretion is advised. So if you want to go like this, I know it's a save me from evil. Okay, the basic premise basic propositions for me is that the purpose of life is more than mere biological reproduction. It is reproduction in the service of growing consciousness, of growing a consciousnny. Okay, it's not just merely physical reproduction. And another word for consciousness is your psyche, or the psyche. P-S-Y-C-H-E. You can Google it. There's a nice myth about it. You probably know about Cupid and Psyche, for most of you. All right. The second point I want to make is that no growth can take place unless and until illusions are seen through and discarded. Only then can one move beyond them. Which brings me to my next point about evil. And that is, we've been told by various institutions that evil consists of this, that, and the other thing. Okay? And when you look behind that, when you look at them, you find that if you analyze them objectively, you find that it's based on myth. It's not real. Okay? They're premises, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. They're premises. But if, rather than just look at it negatively, oh, we're just throwing out these concepts, these ideas of evil, leaving evil to enter into our lives, my contention is that there's a reason we were told that this is the nature of evil. And when we look behind, we'll see that there's a different message. And we follow that message. It's a golden opportunity for an expansion of consciousness. Okay? And that's what this point is about. Evil has been extremely fascinating for mankind ever since the first person bludgeoned the second person over the head. Some people might say it's not the most fascinating topic for mankind. That nasty four-letter word is sex. However, haven't we been told that sex is wicked, dirty, evil? So I rest my case. Back to the point of evil. First, I should begin with what I define as evil. Okay, so we have a touchstone which to measure everything I am saying. I define evil as that which causes suffering to an innocent creature or to the continuity of our environment, which is precisely what's nourishing us and keeping us alive. So the infliction of harm, there's various ways it can be done. It can be done willfully, accidentally, or incidentally. That is just a byproduct of an action. Or it can be done through indifference. You know, just by, I don't care, or just doesn't bother me, that you actually cause harm. And by suffering, I mean having to endure physical, emotional, and mental or psychological pain. Typical evildoers, when you think about it, are the sadist. Why? Because he delights in inflicting suffering on others. And I'm not, I shouldn't get into this, but someone in the last talk I gave said, no, that's not 100% accurate, because between consenting adults, you can have the sadist and the masochist, a perfect match. Match made in heaven. Anyways, the others are the parasite. They treat people and the environment as their own food. And they suck the life out of these other human beings and out of the environment. Then there's the exploiter who abuses other human beings. And then there's the indifferent who doesn't care what harm they cause. Another one is the self-righteous. They're the judge, and they're the executioner of others, the punisher. And God protect us from the self-righteous. And lastly, the warlord, who seeks mastery of others, and the wrathful, who acts out his anger on others. Okay? Warlord, control freaks. You've met up with some of these people in your lives. They're on TV constantly. And the worst thing is, sometimes we've looked in the mirror, there they were. This happened in our lives. And by admitting that, I'm not self-righteous anymore. Just self-righteously, not self-righteous. Okay. There are other categories of evil that I don't think I've come across people talking about. This is called economic violence that is perpetrated against other individuals. And another one is sacred violence. And the suffering they cause is privation for the economic one, hardship, people being deprived of the ability to live or to thrive. And the other one is spiritual violence. And my contention is that for institutional religion, a lot of them create and perpetuate spiritual violence. And one group of people in this room who've experienced it are women. If they're told that they are secondary class, they're not worthy, but to try and become equal to the men who are ministering is a struggle. There's a negative message about a woman's integrity and her worthiness. Actually, if I were a woman, I'd go, I'd be proud of that. Because it's when you're demonized, there's a lot of power is attached to you. They may see it as negative, but there's an awful lot of power. If you want to pursue this a little bit more, write down these two words and then go to your computer and Google it. Magna Mater. M-A-G-N-A-M-A-T-E-R. Whole worlds will open up to you. Just absolutely incredible. Anyways, I am not contending that evil is just imaginary. It is for real. Most of us have lived through the 20th century. And we know what has gone on there. That was an absolutely cruel and vicious century. There's no doubt about the reality of evil. And the evil that people have perpetrated, individuals have perpetrated against each other, groups have perpetrated against each other, and institutions have perpetrated against individuals and communities. Now, there are many ways of looking at evil, and I got some information on 6 basic perspectives and some of their attitudes. Very briefly, I'll summarize them. First one is called the convinced Darwinianist. You all know Charles Darwin is, that's based on his name. Or a sociobiologist. They believe that evil evolves because it helps the species survive. It helps us adapt and has reproductive advantage. And we cannot control the forces of evolution. So evil is in our genes, our chemistry, the wiring of our brains, and some people are born to be evil. Keep that in mind. That there's this idea that evil is innate. Some of you are already making the connection. Innate, I'm born evil. You've heard that somewhere before. Okay. Now, the medical model assumes that evil people, like serial killers and the mentally ill, or at least have a severe character, they are mentally ill, or they have a severe character disorder that explains their behavior. Just means right treatment, a little electric shock therapy, drop a few pills, or some counseling, they'll be all right. The next one is the behavioral psychologist. They believe evil is learned during development, and it's reinforced by the family and the culture. And the next one is social scientists. And they say that cultural and ethnic conflicts are historically, geographically, and economically conditioned. In other words, we're trained to react violently. We're trained to believe that God is on our side and we're right. And propaganda tells us that the enemy is demonic. By the way, who creates propaganda? Government. And who works for the government in creating propaganda? Psychologists. So there's a question about psychology, but I'll come to that in a bit. The last two is the legalistic approach. That there are bad apples in every barrel, and it doesn't not matter how they became bad, we got to do something about it. With stiff penalties to protect the innocent. Okay. And the last one is the theological attitude that describes human beings as prone to sin because we're imperfect creatures. Satan loves to test us. I didn't make any mistake. I didn't do anything wrong. The devil made me do it. Okay. So to get into evil itself, let's start by looking at three types of evildoers. The first one you recognize right away is the sinner. And what institution of ours is concerned with the sinner? Religion. The second one is the criminal. And what institution of ours is concerned with the criminal? Law. And the third one is the madman. And what institution of ours is concerned with madness, criminal madness, is medicine, specifically psychology. So that the source of evil is born with it, or you're breaking a law, you're violating social norms, or there's something wrong with your head. Okay. Now, most of this talk will probably focus on religion because no matter which way we go with this, any of these six, or specifically the three, the criminal and the psychological approach, at root are values and perceptions based on religion. So whether you and I believe in this religion or this concept or that, we have been surrounded, imbued with these values. And the idea is to become conscious of what we're being told. And only then can we evaluate it and say, this is what I accept, this is what I modify, and this is what I reject and replace because here's something more profound meaning. So, at least in the Western civilization, which is massively influenced, read controlled, by the Judeo-Christian religion, specifically the Christian religion, in which I'm going to step on a few toes, so be forewarned. There are two images of the arch-evil figure. Now, you were thinking there's only one. Satan, right? Of course. Now, as far as Satan, he's probably, his chief feature is that he is his ability to deceive. He's often called the Prince of Illusion. The Antichrist, of course, is Satan, isn't it? The Antichrist is Satan, and he's going to delude people. You remember from school Shakespeare, Macbeth? The first act, the witches meet, and they're casting the spell Macbeth, and they say, fair is foul, and foul is fair. That's pure satanic. So what looks good is actually bad, what's bad looks good. Do you remember Sleeping Beauty? When the wicked stepmother gives Sleeping Beauty the apple, and it looks beautiful, she eats. Oh, wait a minute, apple looks good, eats? Where have I heard that one before? No, I haven't. Okay. Okay. We're inheritors of the curse as we try to sort out the illusion from reality in politics and marketing. and it's the curse of Eve. But can you guess who the second evildoer is? Let me ask you this. Would you say someone who's vengeful, spiteful, and as a mass murderer, would you say they're wicked? Would you? Yeah. Okay. Now, who in the Bible, vengeful, spiteful, domineering, and has killed lots of people? God the Father. Blasphemy? However, let me read you a few short things here. Many stories reveal the dark side of the biblical God image. Job clearly tells us in that book that evil that befell Job had a transpersonal origin. God is portrayed as a gambler with Satan. God hardens the heart in Exodus. He hardens the heart of Pharaoh so that he can display his powers by bringing the plagues onto the Egyptians and make sport of them. This passage makes God sound, that's Exodus 10 verses 1 and 2, sound like a sadistic warrior, clearly a very human image. It's also a confusing passage because it means that Pharaoh no longer has free choice. So it makes little sense for him to be punished. I'm sure that the parents of the firstborn children killed by God in the 10th plague experienced the dark side of God. And he confirms his power to kill at will when he says in Deuteronomy, I kill and I make alive, I wound and I heal. Which is very interesting. How many of you have watched the news? There's been a fire, a tragedy, and they are interviewing this woman, and she's saved her children are come out alive. She says, thank God, God was there, God saved me, God protected me. Have you ever seen that? Yeah? Well, what is she saying, the flip side to the person on the other side of that housing unit who lost the kids? That God willfully destroyed those children. That is not a very positive image. The biblical God causes a good deal of suffering. In Isaiah, the prophet speaks for God saying, I make well-being and I create woe. I make weal, meaning well-being, and I create woe. And the prophet, Amos, says that God causes the evil that befalls cities. Poor Jeremiah, one of the great prophets, feels deceived and made into a laughingstock by God. There are several other biblical statements about God's capacity to cause evil and suffering. Lamentations, the Psalms, and one of the most painful to read is Psalm 88, which says, you have put me in the depths of the pit. I suffer your terrors. I am desperate. The ambivalence of the biblical God image, sometimes compassionate and sometimes violent, reflects a projection of attention between good and evil. Now, is God evil? Or is the evil that God wreaks on people good? The study of this has been called theodicy. I'm going to try and answer that today. But in law, to go back to the images, so we have the two images in religion. In law, the image of the arch lawbreaker is the man who is a law unto himself, the despot, the mobster, the murderer, the pillager, the rapist, the child molester, the barbarian. Okay? And in psychology, it's the emotionally unbalanced, the mentally unhinged, the sociopath, the psychopath. Jack the Ripper, our own maid in Canada, Carla Homolka, Eichmann, according to Hannah Arendt, epitomized the banality of evil. Just doing a good job. Okay? But there's premises behind the label of the evildoer. For the sinner, that man is born in sin, the world is divided into good and bad, and man is in the middle. It's dualistic. For those of you who want to pursue this, you're looking at Manichaeanism, and Gnosticism. Okay? If you want, I can write that on the board later. These two, especially Manichaeanism, was almost beat out Christianity when Christianity was getting going around 300. In fact, some of the most famous Christian theologians, one of them specifically I'll be talking about, converted from Manichaeanism to Christianity, repudiated his Manichaean roots, and then introduced some Manichaean philosophy into Christianity. For the criminal, the basic premise is that without the rule of law, man would descend into lawlessness, into anarchy. How many movies have we seen on television and in the theater? There's nuclear war, federal government doesn't work, and then all hell breaks loose. People are looting, pillaging, killing. It's a theme that's gone over and over again. The message being, without us, your life is at risk, so you have to look to us, the federal government, or to the government. The question is whether that stands up. We just have to look to New Orleans and see how much looting was going on, and how many people were actually cooperating and helping each other. The last one is the image of the madman, the antisocial behavior, which is a sign of emotional and mental pathology. And that's the premise. That either we learn or we're genetically predisposed to antisocial behavior, to evil. Now let's start with focus on religion. Bush the Elder, you remember in his campaign speeches? He at one point said that no one could do anything about the poor, that this is their lot in life. This is their lot in life, meaning they're destined to be poor. That comes out of his Puritan background. And there's a concept that some people are born, their souls are going to be saved there. They've got favor in God's eyes no matter what you do, you're one of the elect. Everyone else, forget it. That concept traces to Calvin. Now, one of the Puritan exponents, and where you'll be familiar with it, if not directly through this person's writing, it's in the air, is John Milton, Paradise Lost. He drew an incredibly graphic description of the fall of man. And it's now in the public domain, the imagination. When people talk about the fall, they have this image of what it took place. It's because of him. He was so graphic about it, in fact, that William Blake, a famous poet writing about 1770s, observed that Milton was of the devil's party but did not know it. Basically, what we learn from this portrayal of God is boring, dull, but evil, fun. Okay. He wrote his Paradise Lost in 1667, and I want to give you a plot outline so you get an idea, an image of what he's talking about. God calls all the angels together. Okay. Now, the firstborn of the angels, do you remember his name? The first created of the angels is Lucifer. And God gathers all these angels and he says, hey guys, I'd like to introduce you to Jesus Christ. He's the Messiah and he's very important. So he's my right-hand guy. He's the most important. Satan goes, I beg your pardon, I'm the firstborn. And he said, God's breaking his own rules. The guy's getting old. He's not worthy of being of ruler. Well, I'm young, I'm fresh, he's firstborn. He needs to be replaced. I'll do the job. It'll be big of me, but hey. So he gets together the other angels, you know what's coming, and he tries to overthrow God, and he's cast into hell, and he swears revenge. He learns that God's going to create the purest and the best of all creation. It's going to be humans in his own image. He goes, I'm going to subvert that. So he goes and he tempts Eve, appears as the snake. He tempts Eve. Eve eats. Man falls into sin. Jesus Christ appears to redeem man from sin. End of story. Makes sense, right? Okay. We'll come back to that in a minute. John Calvin, as I said, 1509 to 1564, which predates John Milton, came up with his doctrine of election and developed, actually he did come up with it, he developed it further, and he further developed Martin Luther's concept of election. And Martin Luther was writing lived between 1483 and 1546. He's the founder of Protestantism. Okay? First breakaway from the Catholic Church. Their doctrine traces back to Saint Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, who lived between 354 and 430 CE. He was the Manichaean who converted to Christianity, and it was his concept of original sin which has been influencing us ever since. And wherever Christianity has gone, which is there's not been a continent it has not gone to, that idea is permeating everybody's consciousness. His concept of original sin, to summarize, is that that there's free choice and there's the sin, the curse of the original sin. And he says, oh, we still have free choice, guys. The only thing is that God knows beforehand whether you're going to be able to fight sin. So it's God's grace that is known beforehand, and those people who don't have God's grace have only their personal desires, their instincts, which is the origin of sin, to lead them to sin. Now, to repeat the conflict between two forces, the individual knows what God's will is, but he is not able to choose between his desire and God's will, so he chooses to sin, and God's grace frees him to choose God's will. Further, God knows beforehand which souls God's grace will free and which will be forever bound to sin. Augustine's thinking centers on the fall of man, the story of in the Garden of Eden. I want to briefly go over a plot outline of that one. God places the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the center of the Garden of Eden and tells Adam and Eve not to eat the tree of knowledge, that they will surely die that day if they dare eat it. Satan tempts Eve to eat. Eve eats. Eve tempts Adam to eat. Adam eats. Adam and Eve become aware that they are naked, and they hide their privates. God understands from the shame that they now know the difference between good and evil. Therefore they ate the fruit, and God curses Adam and Eve and all their offspring forever to labor and ultimately to die. Now I want to go back to Milton and his story to unravel the kind of mystery that's going on there. It's got a problem. So let's start at the end. Jesus appears to redeem man from sin. Why did Jesus appear to redeem man from sin? Because man had fallen into sin. And why? Because he ate the fruit that Eve offered him. Why did she eat the fruit? Because Satan tempted her. Why did Satan tempt her? Because he was getting revenge for God displacing him. And why was he casting him to hell? And why did God displace him and cast him to hell? Because he tried to overthrow a God. Why did he try to overthrow God? Because he felt that he was lost favor in God's eyes. He was no longer the inheritor of all that was God's beneficence. And why did God do that? Because he had placed Jesus Christ there on his right-hand side to save man from the curse of the original sin. In other words, when you think about it, God is creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. I create a Messiah to save mankind, but by creating a Savior, I create the need for that Savior. The question then becomes, is Milton making a theological error? If he is, and his theology rests on Augustine, then Augustine must be in theological error. That means you're overturning 2,000 years of Christian theology. The doctrine of original sin. Can the Catholic Church and subsequent Protestant churches be wrong? The theological implication, as I said, is huge. So to look at Augustine's reasoning, his solid reasoning, we have to go back to the fall. And let's look at Eve's actions. Eve stands accused of disobedience to God's will in the act of eating the apple. That is the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. That means being aware of the difference between good and evil. It is good to obey God, right? I mean, that's the chief honcho. So if God says, do this, oh, it's good, I should do that. But in order to recognize that it's good, I have to know that it's good. But the knowledge of that being good is not in here. It's in that fruit in front of me. Disobeying God is a no-no. Every time you disobey God, you're committing a sin. Terrible sin. But to know that to disobey is bad, you have to be aware that it's bad. That awareness was not in Eve. It was resident in that fruit, which was external to her, was in that tree. Now, we wouldn't hold a puppy responsible for piddling on a rug before they are taught not to do it, nor would we hold a child responsible for snitching cookies from the cookie jar because they have no knowledge that they should not do so, even if the parent has told them, don't take any cookies before supper. And how many times has the parent told them? Only once. And the kid goes and does it. Would we hold that child responsible? Or do you recognize, I'm talking about a 2-, 3-year-old. Would you hold them responsible? No, you wouldn't. In law, we recognize that children who find a gun in daddy's, this is more American, find a gun in daddy's drawer, pull it out, and then sister walks to the room and he's seen cops and robbers on television, he points it at her and blows her away. We don't lock that child up in jail for the rest of their lives. We recognize the child had no awareness that what he or she was doing was wrong and is not responsible. So, before the knowledge of good and evil was placed in the fruit of the tree, it was resident in God. Okay, so we're now going backward. It goes from Eve to the tree to God. So God objectified that, put it in the tree, and we now have to question why Eve ate the fruit. And the Genesis story tells us that there are 3 reasons why she ate it. And this is very instructive. I'll quote it. The woman saw that the tree was good for eating. That's an appeal to appetite, hunger. Which is saying, if you ate you did something because of your appetite, you're indulging in it, you're committing a sin. Sex is an appetite, and there are other things that we have which are appetites. You do this, you're committing a sin. Another statement, the next line is, and that it was a delight to the eyes. That's an appeal to appearance or aesthetics, something that looks good. It can be really bad. Fair is foul, foul is fair. The femme fatale. There you go. And the tree was desirable to contemplate. Contemplating, thinking about it, that's an appeal to reason. that the snake's reasons appeared intriguing. In other words, people, don't trust your own mind. Well, if I'm not to trust my own mind, my own reasoning capacity to reason, how do I know? Who do I trust? Well, let me reverse my collar, and I'll tell you what to think and how to behave. So the ineluctable theological conclusion is that Eve, and by extension Adam, were really and truly innocent. That they were not morally, ethically, theologically, socially responsible for their behavior. So that they were also, therefore, in terms of authority, they were not capable of recognizing that failure to heed an order was bad or that to obey a command was good. In short, they committed no sin. Then how did they come to disobey God? Next question that must be asked. And to ask that, you say, well, how did that damn tree get there in the first place? Well, God wanted to objectify it. No problem. He has the right to do that. Where are you going to put the tree, God? Oh, you have the whole universe, but let's say you want to put it on earth, and you don't want Adam and Eve to eat it. Why not put it on the other side of the planet? How about in the top of a mountain? How about the bottom of the ocean? How about just outside of Eden, because that's where they are, and it'll be safe? No. He places it in the garden. Well, okay, you put it in a dense grove of other trees. Chances of them coming across it are better than if you place it outside, but it's still there. So he places it in the garden, but not just anywhere in the garden. He puts it at the center. Now, if you've read a bit of mythology, the center is extremely important in all mythology. There's the Axis Mundi, the Tree of Life. There's various cities which are seen as the center of the universe, the center of the world. That's where all life energy flows out of and to which all things return. So these two trees are placed at the center, and even then, who knows? Adam and Eve might have just meandered by and kept on going. God says, wait a minute. Hey, Adam and Eve, that tree is in this. I have put two trees in the center. Okay. If you just left it at that, the chances are they would have, those are the trees God put. But he says, no. Don't eat any of that fruit. Oh, red flag. And then to icing on the cake, he says, because if you do, you're going to die. Temptation? That name is God. Okay, anyways. So what we have then is that in legal terms, you have what's called entrapment. So you have a picture of this divinity that is deceiving the innocent, and that's called tricking. It's tricking them. And that makes God a trickster. Sounds blasphemous? Mm-hmm. But if you look at the institutions that tell us it represents God here on earth, that it speaks for God, that it alone possesses the truth, we find its history written in blood. There's the Inquisitions, witch burnings, crusades, eradications of North and South American cultures, Hawaiian culture, and on and on and on. Unlike God, whose trickery propels allegorically at least humanity into history, where it will be forced to grow up or die, institutional religion's trickery appears to partake a little more of the dark side than the God it worships. But trickery is an innate attribute to a lot of gods, the ones that are not sanitized. In North American culture, there's a story about Coyote who brings fire to man. Coyote's a trickster figure. Goes to the gods and there's fire. He doesn't have anything to carry the fire back. So he dips his tail into the fire and then goes running back. Oh, I'm not comfortable. Goes into the village. By this time, his tail is aflame. And he's yiping and yelling, and he's running through the village, helter-skelter, setting the whole village ablaze. He brought them fire, yes, more than they wanted. The point is that the trickster God plays, in his trickery on the innocent, also plays tricks on himself. God saw that his creation was good and wanted to keep it good. He would not have introduced, or by playing this trick on Adam, introduced the bad into the good. Now that means for ourselves, as we're looking in the reality of what's going on there, we say, okay, if we're talking about God as a force of creation, about the universe, then the Trinity is actually that which is pro-life, which brings forth life, sustains life, that which dissolves life, it's death too, and it's also capriciousness. In going home today, I could step off the curb, and one of three things could happen to me. Nothing. I could get hit by a bus or a taxi, not necessarily a good thing for me. Or I could find a little bag that has negotiable bonds and it's all worth about $50 million. A good thing. And that actually happened to someone in New York. Stepped off the road, there it was. The fool turned it in. But anyway, that's another story. Okay. Now when we then engage the universe, engage our own potentiality, our own lives, our own abilities, and say, if God is all-powerful, God created this is also part of God, Spinozan, or the idea of the immanence of God as well as transcendence. In other words, the life force is greater than me, it also is resident in me and through me, then so is the death force. And so is the ability to be capricious, to be deceptive, to cause harm to others, to cause others to grow, to enlightenment and the awareness, and also to harm myself in that. And being aware of that force, then I have to set up, I'm more conscious of it, the powers of it become more available to me. I become more prescient. Okay? There's more I can do with other people in being helping, if I choose, or destructive. And it also means that other people who would get me to be destructive, I could be aware of where they're coming from and go, no, I will not partake of that. I don't care about your marches and your waving of banners and this patriotism and all this stuff. I see the end point, there's a lot of innocent people dying. I will not support it. I have that power. I have the power to look at Monsanto. You all know what Monsanto is? It's a company. They're taking out patents on seeds, and they're trying to arrange it so that farmers have to buy these seeds. These seeds are such that they will not reproduce. One growing season and that's it. And Monsanto just keeps giving, they have to buy the seeds from Monsanto. And they're also making genetically modified. That's my own personal image of evil, because it's so anti-life. It's my prejudice. But it's being aware of this, and other people go, no, this is not acceptable behavior. It's not acceptable strip mining and some forestry practices and so on. It has to be sustainable because one, there's going to be children and grandchildren. We want life to go forward. And that's happening. We're being more aware of this day by day. I could go on for hours. I really could. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sum up. Because it's now 10:02, and I'm going to take 5 minutes. And I'm just going to sum this up. Okay? In religion, the message we are told is that God was morally righteous and his creation is good, But we are the humans who have sinned, thus ruining the goodness of God's creation. That the good lies within us through disobedience, and we are the ones who've rejected the good. The reality, when you go back to the text, I didn't make this up, the text said this, is that God is given to trickery, that we are innocent, that the world is filled with danger. And we have to open our eyes, and in order to thrive, to grow up, we have to become more conscious. That's the call. That's the antidote. That if we're to survive the perils of life, we have to become more conscious and cooperative, because you can't do it alone. In law, the message we're told is that the law reigns supreme. We must obey for the collective good and to avoid chaos. The man is innately evil, and without the restraint of civilizing law, he will revert to his barbaric impulses. Laws are created in our best interest, and a law is good because it is a law. The reality is that historically laws are made by people in power, and power seeks to perpetuate itself. Thus there's a built-in bias in law that protects the power elite and its property. And it isn't me just ranting here. We read this in the newspapers. Look at the penalties, and look how these penalties are applied, to whom they're applied. We know that poor people, especially in the States, is a very blatant example. Afro-Americans are far more likely to wind up in jail and spend more time in jail than white people, and that blue-collar crime gets punished far more severely than white-collar crime. So we know that not all laws are good, just, fair, or passed for the public good, or applied equitably. That the punishment imposed for transgression against laws is excessive. You could take 25 years from a man or a woman's life for certain kinds of crime. Take 3 strikes and you're out. Okay? And they could have just been grabbing food off, holding up a 7-Eleven without a gun. It's a felony offense, 3 felony offenses, you're in. There are other approaches to law. We do have other possibilities. We haven't matured enough that we can use restorative. You know, hey, you took this from me, replace it. You broke it, fix it. Or you can't fix it, you can't replace it, give me payment for it. Make up for it. Okay? That then is victim-centered. It heals. And it keeps a person responsible. That's one antidote. So that just blind obedience to law is not necessarily a good thing. We could look at Germany, and their laws were passed outlawing a people. And I go, I think it was Bonhoeffer who said, all that it takes for good to succeed or to triumph is that good people do nothing. All it takes for evil to succeed is that good people do nothing. And we can walk by people who are homeless or people who are suffering and do nothing. And what we've done is help create that atmosphere, that environment where if we become victim, lose our job or whatever, or are in difficulty because we're seniors, I'm talking 90s, frail, in a home, and there's violence there, and no one will come to our aid because we didn't, when we had the vitality, come to their aid. In psychology, the message is that the evil things people do come from a pathology, a deviation from the norm. And the truth is psychology has been used for good, but it has also been used primitively in service of religion to obtain control, to regulate, through fear, shame, guilt, with sophistication by governments, through propaganda, to dominate, to coerce, to control. Just check your elections. To squelch opposition. And in the marketplace, it's used by corporations, for example, with great sophistication to seduce us into being more dutiful consumers. Buy. But everything we buy takes something out of the environment. And psychology has taught us that good people can be subverted into performing evil. Everyone in this room is sitting here thinking, I'm a good person. I would not go and harm someone else. But psychology has ran studies of good people, like us, like you, I'm not going to claim I'm good, like you. And they found that you can be manipulated into doing nasty, nasty things. Okay? One quick reference is they had these students, and they told, there's a person over here who's got a heart condition, but we're going to run a test, and we're going to give him a shock every time he answers a question wrongly. Okay? You don't have to worry about the heart conditions. We've got a technician here, and voltage isn't really that high. And the person was, who was being the victim was actually an actor. They didn't know this. And they ran the test, and the guy started making mistakes, and they gave him little jolts, and then he started wincing, and then going, oh, and says, oh, please stop. And then when the student would become reluctant, the technician would start to become more authoritative. He was wearing a white jacket and said, no, do it. They got to the point where the guy was groaning and feigning passing out. But they were still giving him the shock. Why? Because authority was there, and he was in that situation where he gave up control and gave up his ability to question. Okay. So the antidote is to be aware of the influences of the herd instinct. We are social, we're herd animals. We've got to be aware of our own values and vigilant against inducement by social institutions, blind acceptance of social values, and submission to coercive techniques. To be aware of what's going on in our environment and I don't do this kind of thing, and I won't. We need a profound recognition that things I was being told weren't the way things were, and contrary to what I was constantly being told, they were not always for my benefit. In other words, we need to develop a healthy skepticism as an antidote to our potentiality to be subverted into evil. Okay? When we do this, we are now in a situation of expanded consciousness, of being a greater contributor to the well-being of those around us, which means our lives are more meaningful and more powerfully lived, and it becomes a joy. And we have helped the species expand our consciousness. So my concluding statement is that I think the social Darwinianists have a point, that evil is evolutionary. It's an obstructionist force which compels us to confront whom we are, what our potentialities and capacities are, and to become aware of what we do, what we think, and to be vigilant. And by doing that, we can become greater human beings. That's it. Thank you very much. Any questions? Or you just want to go out and practice? Come on, there might have got to be some questions. Like, when was the last time you committed evil? And what was it? How do I do it?
Well, I don't know if this is so much a question, but a comment, is that with the differences in the religions and the whole concept of Armageddon, etc., that the world is becoming more dangerous because a lot of people have accepted that and feel that, of course, this is what predicted, this is what it's going to be, and therefore are vigilant against those kind of ideas.
Okay. The comment here is that, and check me if I'm quoting you correctly, that according to biblical statements, especially about end of times, that it's people adopt a fatalistic attitude. Well, it's going to happen, so it's a good thing that the bad things, the wars, etc., are a good thing, and should cooperate with it. My comment to that is, if you go back and read Revelations, you find it was talking about an historical epoch at that time. I think it was the Babylonian domination, or the Alexandrian, one of those domination, and it has been picked up by other people and reinterpreted to apply to future times. But the imagery are of kings of that time. So it's been subverted. And even if it were, what makes you think you have to cooperate with wars to bring a good? That evil is necessary to bring forth good. What kind of statement is that about the nature of the deity? Okay. Question? Yes, sir. Yeah, or yes, ma'am.
Your final comments sound like a heck of a lot of work. This eternal vigilance, so that we are constantly making decisions and figuring out whether we're acting appropriately. It sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah.
And we're human. We're
Okay.
not infallible. So we're going to fall constantly and frequently into situations where willfully, accidentally, or incidentally, we commit things which end up being evil. And I think that it behooves us to look in the mirror from time to time and remember what Pogo said, that we have met the enemy and them is us.
Okay. The statement here is that, again, check that I'm right, that it's an awful lot of work being vigilant, and that we will make mistakes, and that we are the evil we are trying to fight against. Well, my comment to that is that we have the potential for evil, yes. It is hard work, yes. But there was this wonderful book, I love the title, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. The other thing is, as I get older, I recognize that I need to do a lot more maintenance and tune-up work. I have to exercise every day, watch my diet, and I also notice the change in mental acuity. So it's more work. I'm happy to pick up the challenge. And yes, I will make mistakes, but if I look at those mistakes, I even have more opportunity to grow. So I used to tell my students, the young'uns, the only, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, I used to tell them, you only stop growing the day after you die. Because they're under the impression I've arrived for themselves. I go, oh yeah, right. So I welcome that hard work, because that means even though I might be in my 70s, 80s, and 90s, life's not over. There's a lot more progress that can be made. And that means that the wisdom that I bring to the people who are coming behind me is greater. And the impact I can have in their lives is greater, which means my life becomes even more meaningful. And those falls, little lessons to keep me humble. Yes?
Can you really call God a trickster or whatever when he apparently knows all and he's the only one aware of the end game? And even though it may appear to us like something is evil or bad, he's the one that really knows what's going on, not man.
If he is omniscient and he knows all, and he hasn't stepped in to stop the shoveling human beings into ovens, nuking cities, development of these chemical and biological weapons, and he's letting it all happen for his purposes, that at least in human terms, let alone in terms of the animals that are wiped out, the birds that get blown up by the bombs that are flying through the air, etc., then it's, in our terms, he's evil. In his terms, it's acceptable. Then why are we called to be good? We're just doing God's work by smashing and destroying. The other thing is, God's pronunciamentos to us have always been to be moral. So is God above his own morality? And the other thing too is, as soon as God steps into history, then he becomes morally responsible for what happens. If you have a parent and you have two children here, okay, and they're hitting each other, what do the parents say? Stop. But what if the children pick up boards and broken bottles and start attacking each other? The parent just going to stand by and do nothing?
But God is not a parent. God is more than all of us. Like, he's more than, I don't know how to say it. So maybe he can't be held accountable, and and have these things put upon them,
Okay.
these attributes.
Well, interesting theological discussion, but theological terms, God is the parent of humankind because God created men, Adam and Eve. Son of man, son of Adam, son of God. These are common epithets given to Adam and to Adam's offspring. Everyone here, all the women, you are daughters of Eve. All the men, you are sons of Adam. And if Adam is the son of God, you are all sons of God. It's in the Bible. Okay. Yes.
You know, all of this talk is based on Judeo-Christian ethics.
Correct.
And so you step out of this culture, go to another one, and most of this just doesn't even wash,
You think?
I think. And you know, even Shakespeare said, nothing is right or wrong, thinking brings it so.
Mm.
But you come to another culture, and you're not going to base it on the concept of deity. How about the atheists in our cultures? You don't have this God figure to say what is right, what is wrong.
They're still influenced by the morality, which is based on it. Yeah, so the question, your question then is, or a statement that other cultures don't have this, it's strictly Judeo-Christian. And I would argue that in terms of sacred violence, you can look at the Vedas, you can look at the Quran, you'll find, especially in monotheistic religions, a lot of this. In the Vedas, there's the gods are battling. In fact, Shiva sits on the top of a mountain, asleep. At one point, he's going to open up a third eye, and everything is going to disappear. I don't know about you disappearing, but I'm not relishing the idea of disappearing.
But these are based on monotheistic.
Not the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita. It's not based on it. Okay? Yeah?
You quoted some scientists, people can be manipulated to do nasty things.
Yes.
Nasty things.
Right.
And sometimes if you don't have other people to manipulate you, you manipulate yourself when your self-interests are involved. So people on Monsanto, people who administer Monsanto think they are doing good, and there are other people who think Monsanto is evil. So you have this, some people think they are doing good, genuinely think. Now my question is, how do you create that consciousness, that awareness which you talked about? I mean, that's the main question. How do you get that consciousness? Without religion. If you don't want to depend on religion,
Okay. Okay. The question is, how do you develop a consciousness that's something is good and something is bad? Otherwise, it's all relative. What's good for me is bad for you. So how can you say something is good or something is bad? How do you develop some objective standard? I was thinking about this a while back, and it occurred to me that if we would put ourselves in a situation where the whole species is in imminent threat of extinction, there's going to be no one stepping from behind, no God stepping from behind a cloud saying, wait a minute, and put on the hands sort of stopping us. And there's going to be no aliens, space aliens, coming out of the sky and saving us. We've got to do it ourselves. And we've got to recognize that if we're going to save ourselves, we can't do it by attacking our own species, members of our own species. That it's imperative for us to work cooperatively rather than competitively, rather than feeding off each other, working to help each other survive. And we have the intellectual ability, we have the technology and the awareness now to create an environment which is sustainable for all human beings. But it's going to take a maturity which we do not yet possess. For instance, in terms of reproduction, people still having 40, 50, 3, 4, 5 children, etc., etc. There's some countries with overpopulated. We could wipe out AIDS in one generation. All it takes for us to get rid of AIDS is those people who are transmitted sexually to practice safe sex, or safer sex, and those who through needles not to share needles. And we've already mastered the technology of blood transfusion, so it could be done.
But they won't do it for
They won't.
malaria.
It won't happen. It won't happen. But the point is that consciousness, it's a potential that is very real, and it can be done. It's there, and you say, what is the objective standards? I'm going to quote one from a neo-pagan concept, and harm nobody, do what thou wilt. So if I recognize I can do what I want, so long as I'm not harming anybody, that means myself or you, it's acceptable. If I'm harming the environment, I'm harming you, I'm harming me, I'm harming that which is nourishes. I shouldn't do it. If I act selfishly or infantilely, just me, that's all that counts as me, I'm creating harm. That's where it's required for this species to grow. Television is aimed at what age group? Mental age group, not
7 years.
chronological.
7 years?
Between 8 and 12. Okay, I think I'm being given the signal to wind it up. One more question?
Well, it's sort of similar to this gentleman's that sometimes it's very hard to sort of sort out what is good and what is bad. But there's some good, and then there's bad. And I think that's some of the problems when I listen to this. That I just finished seeing a documentary of Ken Burns on the Second World War. They only justified war and that sort of thing. Wasn't really. A lot of people were killed.
60 million.
bombing,
Dresden.
Japan and so on, which apparently saved thousands of American lives. It didn't help some of the Japanese bomb them. But I'm just saying, it's not as difficult to sort of put them in pure bottles, if you like. And some of the stocks that I own, for all I know, there's a whole list of them there. There are probably 2 or 3 that are, doing nasty things to the environment. I have no idea. I mean, some have, there's 30 or 40 different companies. I think I'm not sure,
You like chocolate? Do you know how much the chocolate trade involves slave labor for children?
No.
It's been public, but you can buy fair trade chocolate. Okay, so the question then is, how do I do this? It's so difficult. The point is, we can either not do it and let someone else tell us, and we must ask then the question of cui bono, C-U-I-B-O-N-O, meaning to whose benefit? So you tell me I should do this. Like David, get a job, work 9 to 5 in an office. I said, who benefits from this? Or buy this stock. Is it the stock trader selling me so that he can make a cut, or is he really interested in my well-being? No easy answer. But the point is, by engaging it rather than passing responsibility to someone else, and doing the hard work, it'll open up a lot of doors. Can I take one more question? Yes, sir.
You were going to give us the spelling of Manichaeanism?
At the end, okay, come down.
Elizabeth?
I'm here.
Oh,
I did have a question though.
oh, there's a lot of hands going up.
Are you an optimist? Do you think we
Elizabeth, we turn this way, we can't hear you.
Do you think you're an optimist? I mean, are you an optimist? Do you think there's hope for us?
I think there's definitely hope, because I'm not the only person who's saying there's potential and that we have a brain. We all have a brain, we all could use it. And I think we can all, and as I get older, I start to be aware that there's more wisdom in my ignorance. But rather than just relying on other people, I start to see things and see through the illusions. And I'm able to have more of an impact. So I think that being, as I mature, and that means for everyone who's maturing, there's a lot of potentiality that we can give to our species.
Well, on behalf of the Simon Fraser Seniors Lifelong Learner Society, I have really learned a lot today,
Thank you.
and I do thank you. And your scope of knowledge overwhelms me. I've heard
Thank you.